from a fact-finding trip to Cuba. According to my research, I'm only the second member of Congress from the state of Florida since 1959 that has visited the island of Cuba. And I'm here to report that Cuba is changing. They have embarked on economic reforms that the United States of America should promote. The United States of America now should normalize relations and begin a constructive dialogue with the island nation. Fidel Castro is no longer in power. There is a generational change occurring in the government of Cuba. They are still a hardcore communist nation, but they are embarking on market reforms in their economy that deserve encouragement. To the point now where I believe policymakers in Washington should consider lifting the embargo on Cuba. They should consider, they should lift the travel restrictions that prevent Americans from traveling to Cuba. Remember, Cuba is the only country in the world that American citizens are restrained from traveling to. Americans can travel to North Korea with warnings they can travel to Syria and Iran. And yet, a little more than an hour away from the Tampa International Airport, all of our neighbors cannot visit and travel. And it is going to be that engagement, that constructive dialogue, the encouragement of economic reforms that I believe will lead to greater political reforms on the island. I'm going to be encouraging President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry to open talks to lead to greater trade and travel opportunities. This should not be done with blinders on, however. There are still very significant human rights challenges in Cuba. It's still, to many extents, a repressive regime that does not allow citizens to enjoy all of the human rights that we all enjoy. But after 50 years of an embargo and isolation that has proven it hasn't worked in bringing about a lot of change, it's time to try something new and to refresh our relationship. And I'm very proud that it's the Tampa Bay area that can help lead that change. Here are a few things that I see as benefits based upon my official meetings there, and then I'll be happy to take questions. I had a briefing with the Energy Ministry. As you know, Cuba is drilling for oil off of its shores. This is a risk to the environment of Florida because it's so close. If they had a blowout and oil were to come into the Florida Straits and onto the coastline of Florida, most likely the East Coast, that would be very detrimental. I was very pleasantly surprised that they have been in productive multilateral talks with the United States, Jamaica, but the Bahamas and Mexico, to the point where they have adopted many of the safety recommendations in America's oil spill report authored by Senator Bob Graham and former EPA Secretary Bill Riley. But they want the better technology to be able to employ as they continue to search for oil. Many of the best equipment is in the United States. They are prevented from importing or using any of the best equipment that is available. They are prevented even from importing any type of equipment that has American-made components in it. I think that's backwards in this day and age. I think it would be a benefit to American businesses, like the one I visited 2 weeks ago here at the Port of Tampa. That's a steel manufacturer shipping out component parts, large steel structures, infrastructure parts all across the Caribbean except Cuba, 90 miles from Florida shores. I also met with the Ministry of Tourism. They are very excited about future expansion of their tourism sector, but don't be fooled. This is not a place for American tourists to go lie on the beach right now. This is a very poor country that is suffering from inadequate infrastructure, But I think they see, as they don't find oil, as Hugo Chavez has died and reliance on Venezuelan subsidies will fade away, they see the tourism sector as their area of growth. This could be very beneficial to Tampa. What a pleasure it was to depart from the Tampa International Airport. I was so impressed. It is so easy. Lining up with Cuban-American families who are traveling to see their relatives. And then some other religious and educational tour groups. Have you seen the stories coming out of the Miami airport over the last few weeks? Long lines, long waits, chaos. It is very difficult to get in and out of there. So we continue to provide the best travel opportunity to Cuba right now. But this community has not marketed itself as it should to become a gateway to Cuba. There are so many of the travel companies that have approval right now, like the Smithsonian Institution, the group I traveled with, the Center for Democracy in the Americas, that are not aware of how easy and what a pleasant experience it is to travel through the Tampa airport. We've got to do a better job here, and I hope Santiago Corrado, the new director of Tampa Bay and Company, can help lift this effort and build this effort. And then we will be poised, as Cuba opens up over the coming decades, to be the true gateway to Cuba for the benefit of the families, all of our neighbors who live here, but for the small businesses that work here. There was also a very interesting briefing at the Cultural Ministry. Right now, the embargo, that any country in the world, you can trade art, buy and sell art. There's a great market in the United States for Cuban art. In fact, I ran into Rob Rowan from Nuance Galleries just this morning, and he said, I have a huge new art exhibit coming. The Tampa Museum of Art is going to open a Havana exhibit. The Cubans shared with me that they intend to bring a huge cultural exhibit to Ybor City over the coming months and coming years. These are the kind of exchanges that can foster greater dialogue and improve situation when it comes to human rights and the political situation on the island, and greater understanding among all people. Because in the end, I think most people want the same thing when it comes to leading a productive life. They want to be free to make those decisions. They want a healthy situation for their families. They want to be able to travel to see their families without bureaucracy and red tape. And I think we have a long way to go to make that happen for this community and for the people in Cuba. But I'm very heartened after traveling their desire to change from their old line, centralized communist economy to something of a market economy. And now would not be the time to say, Cuba, you're making those changes, but you're going to remain isolated from the United States, the greatest democracy in the world. I think it's time to try something different and end the embargo and lift these travel restrictions, especially.
You know, Congresswoman, when Dick Greco, as you're well aware, went a few years ago, he received a lot of criticism. When Beyonc went this weekend, she received a lot of criticism. Are you worried that you will also receive criticism for coming out with this position?
I'm certain that I will receive some criticism, but you know, I think about the families I see every day here in this office. That's the most basic to me. First, they'd like to see their grandmother in Cuba, and it's very difficult. Or the 101-year-old woman that lives here in West Tampa, who is not going to live too much longer, and her daughter wants to come from Cuba to see her. This is a relationship now that doesn't work. People, you've got to think about those families and why we make it so difficult now in a time when Cuba is changing. And for people, it's very easy if you don't understand that they are changing to say, oh well, it's the same as ever. It's not the same as ever. It is changing, and that should be encouraged.
Congresswoman, I'm guessing you didn't get to the beach on this trip, because if you had, you'd know that they're awesome beaches. Actually, a great place for Americans to go and lay on. My question is, are you proposing a lifting of the travel ban for all Americans, and if so, is it without condition? Because the thing that's gotten in the way of the embargo being lifted for the last 50 years is it's always been predicated with free and fair elections, a free press, a release of political prisoners. Are you proposing lifting the embargo and the travel ban without those preconditions, without that quid pro quo?
I think that is our ultimate goal. There are some things President Obama can do on travel and trade, but we also have the Helms-Burton law that will have to be changed by the Congress. I think it would be fair if for both countries to sit down and work out some of these technical issues, the Cuban Adjustment Act. But I think, yes, we could, the embargo should go and travel restrictions should go. I think we've got to demonstrate some acknowledgement that they are changing and encourage further change in their economic and political system.
Congressman Castor, when you said Castro is no longer in control, what do you mean by that?
Fidel Castro is no longer the head of the Cuban government. His brother Raul is. Raul is, I learned in my discussions, is a much more practical ruler. He has instituted many of these economic reforms. They, as a former county commissioner, I talked to many of the folks there to say, okay, if the centralized government, does the centralized government provide people on the local level the ability to make decisions on, garbage pickup and infrastructure and the repair of Old Havana? And they're starting this process. They're starting the collection of certain taxes in the hotels and motels that they're going to funnel back to improve infrastructure. Those are the kind of things that we should be encouraging now. And there are our allies throughout the world are encouraging us to lift the embargo and travel restrictions. We could provide great technical assistance to Cuba and help spur along these very important changes.
Congressman, can you talk about your evolution? You certainly weren't talking this way when you ran in 2006. Now, I know you're talking a lot about what's changed in Cuba. You talked a year and a half ago about making this trip, which you've done now. How much are your own thoughts in hearing what other people have had to say about lifting these sanctions?
Well, I think, again, it's my experience here in the office, talking with Cuban-American families every day. It's the experience in talking with business leaders, small businesses, large businesses, people at the port of Tampa that understand they're shipping things all throughout the Caribbean and all across the globe, and yet 90 miles from Florida, there's a potential market there that they can't get to. The embargo is a relic of the Cold War era, and we're out of that era now. I was in East Berlin, and I was in Prague in 1990 after the Berlin Wall had come down, and I was in Prague when the first independent newspapers were being thrown out in the train stations. And at that time, was America, had we said no travel of Americans to those former communist bloc nations? No, we had those dialogues, the engagements, the relationships that I think proved to be very important as those communist nations changed to more market-oriented economies. Same thing has happened in Vietnam. Same thing has happened in China. They remain communist, but they have instituted very significant market reforms, and they did it all the while where Americans were able to travel and business interests were able to work there.
Congresswoman, do you see any reason to keep Cuba on the list of terrorist nations?
I do not. That's one of the items that I'm going to press with Secretary Kerry and President Obama. I mean, does it make sense that Cuba remains on this list of state sponsors of terrorism? The reason they're on that list is there was some tie to the FARC rebels in Colombia. Well, right now, Cuba is hosting the peace talks between the government of Colombia and the FARC. So that's not a very good rationale. Also on that list, North Korea is not on that list. So there's this great irrationality when it comes to that state-sponsored terrorism list.
So, Congressman, what are you going to be doing with this information? How is this going to be something that you use in Washington as sort of a push for change?
There are changes that need to happen on the federal level, on the state level, and here locally. On the federal level, it's the ultimate goal of lifting the embargo, liberalizing the travel, taking off this restriction on Americans to travel. the state sponsor of terrorism list, possibly immigration issues under the Cuban Adjustment Act. At the state level, the one thing that just it makes no sense at all is the fact that Florida universities are banned from any kind of academic exchange with the University of Havana and other academics in Cuba. Meanwhile, I'm at the Biotechnology Center in Cuba, and they're talking about their exchange programs with other U.S. universities, the University of Alabama, Columbia University. You know, we have the best and the brightest here at the University of South Florida, and many terrific scholars in the history of Tampa and the history of Cuba and how we're tied together, how we're linked, and that law should be changed.
But how are you going to?
I'm going to press and I'm not in the Florida legislature, but they're convening other members and talking with them about my experience. And then on the local level, it really is marketing this fabulous community and benefiting the small businesses, the port and the airport, and making sure we're poised as a gateway, and that we're doing everything we can do under the legal framework right now, but looking at what makes sense in change in the future.
So on the local level, on the federal level, is there a meeting set up with the Secretary of State, or the President? Or
here's the problem with that. I talked with Secretary Kerry before he was confirmed as Secretary of State, and he's very interested in change. But think of the challenges all across the world right now. The problem is elevating this issue among all the those challenges. Syria, Egypt, Israel, Iran, troops coming home from Afghanistan. When you look at all that and where Secretary Kerry is spending a lot of his time, it's just difficult to elevate the Cuba issue on that whole agenda. But we're going to try, and it's incumbent upon business people and Cuban Americans and others that see great potential here and want to recognize that the economy of Cuba is changing and it should be encouraged rather than rely on this outdated policy.
You know, Congresswoman, that one of the critics who don't want to do this is your colleague in South Florida, Deputy Washington Shultz, who, of course, is the DNC chair. She seems to have a pretty good relationship with the president. How are you able to basically, persuade him to look at your side of you over hers?
Well, just look at the progress we've made so far with the flights to Cuba. I have a good relationship with the president as well. Secretary Kerry has expressed interest in this issue, and you make your best arguments and you rally people who are interested in the matter. And I don't think it's fair right now for any policymaker in Washington to say this is really working, this embargo, this thing we've done for 50 years has really worked, when we have other models across the world that demonstrate greater engagement and dialogue help lead to significant change and not isolation.
Speaking of your colleagues from the Florida delegation, have you talked to Representatives Ross Layton or Diaz-Balart about this issue, about your going?
I did not talk with them about my trip, but just 3 weeks ago, we all met together with Cuban dissident Yoani Sanchez in the United States Capitol. There were members of Congress that had all points of view when it came to the embargo. And in fact, what you hear from the dissident community in Cuba, the brave people that are outspoken and are demanding change outside the government, they all share the same goal of lifting the embargo. So I was pleased that Yoani Sanchez made that plain to my colleagues that are not in favor of lifting the embargo.
Representative, can you talk a little bit about gun control? It's obviously heating up this week. Right now, Obama is in Connecticut. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the changes and if we're going to actually get an agreement?
Can we do that after, in case anybody wants to?
Yeah, she has to get to another appointment, so
Will
we have
you
to
be
wrap
going
this up.
again?
I do. I look forward to the opportunity.
There's no date set up?
No date. But the Tampa Chamber of Commerce is going to have a very significant trip next month. The Florida Orchestra will continue their cultural exchange. I think, and I know that there's a group with the Council of Foreign Relations that left yesterday, a number of people from Tampa. Add this on top of the many churches throughout this community that continue to have mission trips and religious exchanges. There is a lot of activity going on right now, and soon it's not going to be particularly unique to have a member of Congress from Florida go, I don't think.
Congresswoman, I know you were there just for business, but what did you enjoy the most of being in Cuba and there with Cuba?
Really, the architecture is beautiful, and the Cuban people are very warm and engaging. And like I said, we all fundamentally share those values that you want the best for your family and you want the best for your community, and they're struggling with how to improve their situation. It's very poor, and Havana is beautiful, but it is decrepit. And if something doesn't happen there, they're going to lose their identity, because it is very special, and that will be shown.